Hello. If you're new here, my name is Shelly. If you like discussing true crime, conspiracy theories, and serial killers, and you also like discussing makeup, then stick around and hopefully you'll enjoy yourself. Now, for the most part, I've just been like jumping right into the video, but right now I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit first. I hate long intros. I know, I hate long intros too. So I'm gonna get through this as fast as I can. So this will be my last upload until my 13 days of Shalloween, which is something that I do as a countdown to Halloween. I'll upload a video every single day for 13 days, the final one being on or before Halloween. However, I end up doing it. So if you don't see me uploading for a couple of weeks, just know that I am not disappearing. I'm not going anywhere, and by the end of October you will have had enough of me. You will have your fill, trust me. I have true crime, I have makeup tutorials, I don't know what else yet. Yeah, we'll see what all I can come up with to do. So not every single video will be a true crime serial killer video. There are definitely going to be quite a few in there, but I'm also going to be doing some focused on makeup because as well as doing this, I also do makeup stuff. So I am very excited because this is my favorite time of the year, and today we're going to do a fall look because, was it yesterday was the first day of fall or something? And also I'm going to do a giveaway. You'll be able to enter the giveaway October 1st, and then the last day of the giveaway is Halloween, and on Halloween the winner will be announced. So make sure that you are entered. I will release all of the rules and everything on my Instagram, so make sure you're following me on my Instagram because October 1st is when I'm announcing how to enter and all of that good stuff. And let's get into this guy now. So we're gonna be talking about Harold Frederick Shipman Jr. And this guy, I found him because I googled who has the most kills or body count, like which serial killer has the biggest body count, and this guy is the one that came up. Some people think he killed up to 300 people. We'll get into it later, but there's a certain amount that are for sure proven, but then there's a large amount that it's suspected he killed them, but no one really knows for sure, and we'll get into all that later. But this guy was a doctor. He was nicknamed the Dr. Death, as many doctors that are serial killers are. I just wanted to do this case because supposedly he has the highest body count. He is the most prolific serial killer. Harold Frederick Shipman Jr. I don't know why I keep saying his full name. Harold Shipman was born January 14th, 1946 in Nottingham, England. Yes, so if you're from the UK, you probably know about this guy. Harold's father was Harold Shipman. He is named after his father, and his mother was Vera Britton. Now, his parents were like really strong Methodists, and so they were just very like strict religiously and stuff. It was just a regular working class family. His father was very distant, so he didn't really get to know his father very well, but his relationship with his mother was very like Norman Bates style almost. Like, he was super close to his mother that it was like creepy, you know? But in school, he was a very sporty guy, played rugby, and at one point he was like vice president or vice captain of the athletics team. And he was really good at sports and that kind of thing. So he was like a jock, but he was more of a loner jock. So he wasn't like super popular or anything. So along with playing rugby, he also became a long distance runner, and he was just like good at all the sports basically. He passed his 11 plus exams to get into the high pavement, and you know, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but if you are in the UK, then you probably know exactly what that means. I guess it's just like you have to pass certain tests in order to get into the high pavement. And I told you that he was very close to his mother, and their relationship was just creepy how close they were. And when Harold was a teenager, I don't know if this is important to you, but he went by Fred because Frederick was his middle name. His father was Harold Shipman, so he just went by Fred. So when Harold was 17, I'm just gonna call him Harold, his mother was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. He had been studying for his A levels, and so he was pretty busy when his mother was diagnosed. He kind of just became the one to oversee all of her treatment, and he was fully invested in making sure that she was okay. Even though he was a busy boy, he kind of, I don't want to say like dropped everything, but he kind of dropped everything just to kind of go and take care of her and make sure that she was getting the care that she needed. The doctor would come to their home, or the GP, which is general practitioner. So he would visit them at their home, and he would give her morphine, because back then, like in the 50s, 60s or whatever, probably even before that too, they would just give cancer patients like high doses of morphine, something to help with the pain, because they didn't really have a lot of research or medicine or care that they were able to give the cancer patients, because they just didn't know as much as we do now. So they would just make them comfortable for as long as possible. And so that's what the doctor would do. He would show up at their house, and Harold would sit there and watch his mother be in pain all day, and then the doctor would come in, and then the doctor would give her this morphine, this pain medicine, and then it would all go away. And he just kind of saw how much it helped his mother and how much it helped her relax and how it really took away her pain. And I really feel like that was such a like magical experience for him, because he's sitting there taking care of her and she's in so much pain and there's nothing he can do about it. And then the doctor comes in and just takes away all of her pain. So I really feel like that resonated with him, and that is what made him decide to go to school to become a doctor. June 21st of 1963, Vera passed away at the age 43. So this guy was a little bit weird, because he lived with his mother, and someone asked him what he was gonna do now that his mother was dead, because you know, he was just a young man and all he did was take care of her basically, and he just said go for a run, and he did. He literally just went jogging and he was out all night on a run. So he decided he wanted to go to medical school. So of course, getting into medical school, you have to pass the entrance exams, and first round of entrance exams he actually did not pass. And the same year that he was trying to get into medical school, he meets his future wife, Miss Primrose Everdeen. Just kidding, her name isn't Primrose Everdeen, it's Primrose Oxtoby, and she was 17 years old at this time. Every time I see Primrose, I just think of the Hunger Games. Primrose was a farmer's daughter, and like I told you before, Harold was a loner, and he just kind of kept to himself, and he was really quiet. He didn't really like put himself out there. He didn't really try to make any new friends. But with Primrose, apparently he just walked right up to her and asked her out, which is not typical for this guy. So I don't know what it was about Primrose, but he saw her and he just went for it. So they clicked immediately, and they got married in 1966. And Harold is 19 years old at this time, and Primrose is 17 years old. And apparently Primrose was 5 months pregnant when they decided to get married. So they moved really, really fast. I don't know if they got married that fast because she was pregnant, or if they just got married that fast because it's just something that they wanted to do. They just felt so connected to each other. I'm not sure, but they were happy. They had a really happy marriage. Later on, Primrose stands by him, and it seems that they were soulmates and they were meant for each other. So Harold graduated from Leeds School of Medicine in 1970, and he worked at the General Pontefract Infirmary, or Pontefract General Infirmary in West Yorkshire. And here he was a junior doctor for a couple of years, and then in 1974 he became a GP, which is a general practitioner that I told you earlier. And he became a GP at the Abraham Ormerod Medical Center in Todmorden. So if you're from the UK, you can probably pronounce all of that better than I can. So about a year after he became a general practitioner, Harold was caught forging prescriptions for himself, and he was prescribing himself pethidine or Demerol, and he was caught and he had to attend a drug rehab clinic in York, and he had drug and forgery charges, and he ended up having to pay a fine of £600. So because he was prescribing himself pethidine, or pethidine, I'm not really sure if it's pethidine or pethidine, he was blacking out a lot and he couldn't remember certain things, and Primrose was having to drive him to all of his appointments, because back then a general practitioner, like now we have like the home health people that specifically go around to people's houses, and a GP doesn't really do that now, but back then the GP did make house visits all the time. Primrose was having to drive him to all of his house visits because he was blacking out so much, and it got to the point where his coworkers thought that he had epilepsy. Everyone was really worried about him. One day his veins collapsed. His colleagues had noticed a spot in his arm where he had been injecting himself. His colleagues were really, really worried about him at this point, and they were all just trying to figure out like what's wrong, is he okay? Everyone's really worried about him. They were worried that something was seriously wrong with him, and whenever everyone found out that he had been forging prescriptions for himself, everyone was super mad at him because everyone was so worried that something was gonna happen to him. It was just him taking drugs, which in itself is its own sickness, being addicted to drugs. Like, they were thinking that he had, like, medically there was something very wrong, and whenever everyone found out that he had been hurting himself, everyone was really upset with him, and he blamed it on being depressed. That's why he injected himself. He also blamed it on the fact that he had addictive behavior. After all of this gets solved, like after he pays the fine and everything, it appears that rehab worked because he is perfectly fine after a while and no one really has to worry about him anymore, or so they think. And later on he keeps it this huge secret that he had this whole problem. So he doesn't even like talk about it later on or really acknowledge it. So in 1977 he moves his whole family to Mottram, and he became a GP at Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde, which was near Manchester. And he moved here because the GMC, or the General Medical Council, sent him a letter, and I cannot get this brow gel open, so I'm gonna just skip that. And they were basically saying, you're a naughty boy, what you did was bad, but we're not gonna fire you. That was about it. They just sent him a strongly worded letter. They did not fire him. He did not really get in any trouble at all for forging prescriptions. I think this man should have gotten in a lot more trouble. I feel like nowadays he definitely would have gotten in a lot more trouble. It really seemed like he was getting a lot better, and he had a seat on the local medical committee, and he supervised the GPs in the area, and he was a member of the local community health council. So he became kind of a prominent member in society. People trusted him. He was a PTA at his children's school in Mottram, which is part of the Parent-Teacher Association. So he was very involved in a lot of things. His patients loved him because you could just go to him and he would just prescribe you whatever you wanted. He was very generous with his prescriptions, and that made a lot of his patients really like him. It was super easy to get a prescription from him, and his co-workers said that he was egotistical, arrogant, full of himself, all of this stuff. He was just, I feel like at this point he was on such a high because he was a very respected member of the community at this point. His patients loved him. He could do no wrong. He had a seat on the committee. He was part of the community, all of this stuff, but his co-workers were just like, you are so full of yourself. So he's one of those guys. He would prescribe his patients whatever they needed, but he would overprescribe, and then they would always leave with the amount that they needed. But because he had overprescribed, he would take the extra for himself. He was writing fake prescriptions and he was writing fake names. Basically, he was forging prescriptions again. And back then, they didn't have all of their files on computers back then. So it was a lot easier to get away with this stuff than it would be now. But the point is, he definitely went back to forging prescriptions and stuff. In 1983, he was actually interviewed in an edition of the Granada television documentary World in Action. He was interviewed about how mentally ill people should be treated in the community, and like from a doctor's point of view, what do you think? This guy was just on top of the world at this point. So because he was so darn successful, in 1993 he opened his own private practice at 21 Market Street. And because his patients liked him so much, whenever he moved and opened his own general surgery practice, all of his patients moved with him from Donnybrook over to his practice. So Donnybrook was upset because he ended up taking a lot of their business, a lot of their patients. Sorry, hold on. My dog thinks she's dying because I'm in here. They have been standing outside my door whining. I'm sorry if you could hear them. Go lay down. She does this thing where if she wants something, she like goes please or whatever. It's like her please, and she did that, and so I had to let them in. You're gonna have to chill and lay down. There was a lady named Dr. Linda Reynolds, and she was a GP at Brook Surgery in Hyde, and Brook Surgery was right across the street from Shipman's place. So she would sign off on any deaths that Shipman had, because back then, let me see if I can explain this. If a doctor had a patient that died, the doctor had to get another doctor to sign off on it and to basically confirm this is what was wrong with the patient, this is what made them die. It's not the doctor's fault that they're dead, basically. And so, because Linda and Harold worked so close to each other, they did that for each other. And so they would always sign off on each other's death certificates or whatever it's called. And one day, a lady that worked at the funeral parlor, her name was Deborah Massey, and she went to Linda and she was like, have you noticed how many elderly women death certificates we've gotten from Harold? There's been a lot of people that have died in Harold's care. What's going on? Don't you think it's suspicious? And Linda, March 24th of 1998, actually went to the police about this, and she told them how she was concerned about how many death certificates she had co-signed on for Harold, because it was a suspicious amount. It was way more death certificates than she had, and they were both doctors doing the same thing. So Linda went to the coroner for the South Manchester district, who was named John Pollard. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but she had countersigned a lot of cremation forms for elderly women from Shipman. Then that's when the coroner took it to the police, and then the police couldn't really find enough evidence or anything, so they were just like, it's just elderly women. Elderly women died. This is just a thing that happens. No one really thought twice about it, and they really could not find enough evidence, so they were never able to press any charges or anything. Deborah Massey, the woman that worked at the funeral parlor, noticed that they were all elderly women who had died at home, and they had all died in an upright sitting position, fully clothed and everything, but they weren't like, whenever a person is really sick, they'd usually be like laying in bed or something. But Deborah noticed that everyone had been sitting upright and they were fully clothed, like they were ready for the day, ready to go somewhere. It was just something weird. Something was off about it, and it did not sit right with Deborah. And I agree, that is weird, because if someone's like super sick and they're almost to the point of dying, they're probably gonna be like laying down, you know, right? So in the UK at this time, it was like anyone that was found dead in their home, they would call the GP, and the GP would come and check on them and kind of be like, yes, we should reach out to a coroner to investigate, or yes, this person, I was treating this person and it makes sense that they've died. So they would either call someone to investigate the death, or they would sign the medical certificate or cause of death, and then they would give that certificate to a family member, and then the family member would take it to the local register office, and then they would sign off on the death certificate. Whenever they get someone to sign off on the death certificate, then they take that death certificate to a funeral parlor, and then that's whenever the family decides whether they want the person to be buried or cremated or whatever it was. There was a Form A, a Form B, and a Form C. Whenever someone dies, the process is pretty long, apparently. I had no idea that it was this long and difficult, but I mean, I kind of get it, because you want to make sure that if the person died, that it was natural causes. So like all of these extra steps are just like all of these different people verifying that, like, yes, this happened, yes, it was natural causes, no, this person wasn't murdered, and that kind of thing. So I get it, but it is a lot. Like, the family is already going through like grief and mourning, then you're making them go through all of this extra stuff. I get it, I understand, it's just, it's rough. So quickly, I don't want to go into like all of the details, but the relatives would fill out Form A, which would give them the authority for cremation, and then the doctor or the GP would fill out Form B, and this had to be someone who attended to the person before and after their death, inspected them and everything. And then Form C was the confirmatory medical certificate, so this had to be signed by someone who, they didn't have to take care of the patient or anything, but they had to like examine the body, and then they had to go and ask the first doctor questions and kind of confirm everything. They had to sign off on it just to kind of make sure that that doctor wasn't doing anything like sketchy, you know. Let's just say that Dr. Harold Shipman was doing a lot of cremations, because we all know when a body's cremated, you can't go back and examine the body. There's nothing to exhume and examine. So if there's no body, there's no evidence. This guy was going around and he would be recommending cremations to his patients, which is super sketchy. Like, why does it matter to a doctor what you do with your family member's body unless the doctor was doing something super sketchy? So if you have a doctor who recommends a cremation, I don't know. just kind of check out the situation before you go through with it, I guess. But I mean, I don't blame these people. I'm not victim blaming at all. You're supposed to be able to trust your doctor with your life. You're supposed to be able to trust them with your family member's life. And so this is like a really sad and terrible situation. And he would also, because, you know, there always had to be a second doctor signing off on everything, he would rotate the doctors that he used so that no one would catch on how many deaths he had. And later on, they found out that his death rate was 10 times higher than the other doctors in that area. Between 1974 and 1978, he issued 521 death certificates. So they took the numbers of death certificates that 10 other GPs in the area gave out, and they gave out 1,136, like within that time frame. So his amount of death certificates alone was like half the amount of death certificates of 10 other GPs. You have 10 GPs that have just over 1,100 deaths in just a few years, and then you have this one doctor who has half that amount. Absolutely insane. It's a little suspicious, but the police didn't really have the evidence that they needed, so they had like the lower ranking officers on the case. So it wasn't like they put their best detectives on it. Here's some random detectives, they'll look around, check it out, see if they find anything, that kind of thing. Like, the police were not actively pursuing this case. And the police that were checking him out did not even look at his background. They didn't check his records or anything. If they had checked his records, they probably would have seen that he had a past of forging prescriptions and drug abuse, but they didn't look at any of that. So they never figured that out, which, I mean, great police work, guys. Way to go. But like, while they were checking him out, they didn't contact him. They didn't contact any of his relatives. They didn't contact any of his patients. They didn't contact any of his patients' relatives. Just were not checking him out like they were supposed to be. It seems like they just like opened the case, looked at stuff, walked around town, maybe went on a little day walk, and then they were like, you know what, we didn't find anything, bye. But then later on, when everyone discovered that he has the highest body count out of any other serial killers, these officers were blamed and ridiculed for not arresting him when they had the chance. It's just really frustrating to me because after them investigating him and everything, he killed 3 more people, and that could have been avoided if they had taken it seriously and looked into his background and stuff, but they didn't. I'm upset with them. They did contact the local health authority to check the records of 19 of his patients, and they were just trying to look at like inconsistencies between the illness and the death of his patients. So they were like trying to see if their illness was not what caused them to die, basically. They were just looking for any of the inconsistencies, but they didn't know about how in the past he was known for forging and faking documents. So they had no idea. If they had, then they probably would have figured out after his patients died, he would go back and like change the facts surrounding their case. He just knew how to change stuff to make it seem like he wasn't lying. He had forged the medical records, and he would add fake illnesses after they had died. In August of '98, John Shaw, who was a taxi driver, told the police that he had driven elderly people who seemed to be in really good health to Shipman, but they had died shortly after. And so he told the police that this was just really, really suspicious, because when you're in the car with someone, you can tell if they're sick or if they're pretty healthy for their age. And he was saying that these elderly people, they seemed okay, so he didn't get how they were all dying. So he took that to police, and he gave them about 21 different names. So the police were looking into that, which, you know, put your hands together for this outstanding citizen. Good job, guy. Good job for paying attention, doing an awesome job, you know, driving people around. Good job. Howard Shipman's final victim was Miss Kathleen Grundy, who was 81 years old. Miss Kathleen Grundy was not retired or anything. She was actually still in pretty good health. She was super energetic. Her colleagues all said that, you know, she was still working hard. She knew everybody there. Everyone knew her pretty well. She hadn't shown up for her pensioners luncheon meeting, and everyone knew that this was weird because Kathleen showed up for everything. She was always there, and if she couldn't be there, she would always let them know. So everyone knew that it was completely unlike her to just not show up to something. So 2 of her colleagues actually make their way over to her house just to check on her and make sure everything was okay. When her colleagues got there, they went inside and she was sitting on her couch upright and she had passed away. Now, this is really weird right away because she had a specific chair that she always sat in. Everyone knows someone who has like their chair, right? Like the one chair that they always sit in and no one else sits in that chair. Like that is that person's chair. And her chair was in the living room and it was pointed facing the door so that if anyone came to the door, she'd be able to look up and see who it was. And she was not sitting in her chair. So right away, that was a red flag. She was found sitting on her couch and she never sat on her couch. So her colleagues didn't know, but earlier that day, she had her GP coming over, who was Harold Shipman, to take some blood because he told her that he wanted to do a blood test because at 81 years old, she was so healthy, and as a doctor, he wanted to run her blood through a test and he wanted to see like why she was so healthy and stuff. And of course, being like the fun-loving lady that she is, she agreed to it. So he stopped by her house that day to get some blood for his blood test, but he had injected her with diamorphine instead, and unfortunately she overdosed on it and died. And another weird thing was whenever the family got the death certificate and everything, Shipman had already checked the box for cremation, but the family was like, we don't want a cremation, no thank you, we want to have like a burial and all of that stuff. And so that was really sketchy because no doctor just kind of automatically checks cremation like that. So Kathleen had a daughter whose name was Angela Woodruff, and Kathleen's daughter Angela was a lawyer. And one day Angela got a call from a man named Brian Burgess who worked at Hamilton and Ward, which was like a place that handles like wills and stuff. This Brian Burgess guy was contacting Angela because he had questions about the authenticity of the will that he received, because it was just a really like weird will. And Angela was also finding this sketchy because she had worked with her mom on a will just 10 years prior and they had used a different company. So this was like a new company, and Angela was like, I mean, why would her mom just switch companies like that? Super sketch. So Brian was concerned about the will because it didn't include anything about her children. She didn't leave any money to her children or her family, and it left everything she had to her GP, Dr. Harold Shipman. It was about £386,000 and it included 2 houses. So the will itself was super sketchy because it was written in like all caps, and it seemed like whoever did it was in a rush and they couldn't keep up with whoever was talking or something. Just like the way that it was written was really sketchy and unprofessional. They received this the day that she died, even though it was dated June 9th and she died June 24th. it came with a letter that said, "Dear sir, I enclose a copy of my will. I think it's clear in intent I wish Dr. Shipman to benefit by having my estate. But if he dies or cannot accept it, then the estate goes to my daughter. I would like you to be executor of the will, and I intend to make an appointment to discuss this and my will in the near future." So whenever they received it, they just filed it and waited for her to contact them, because what else are you gonna do? 6 days after Kathleen's death, they received a letter that had no return address or anything, but it was written in the same way as the will, with like the same typewriter, all like messy and capital letters, and not like misspellings, but like missing letters and stuff. It says, "Dear sir, I regret to inform you that Mrs. K. Grundy, 79 Jolene Hyde, died last week. I understand that she launched a will with you, and I, as a friend, typed out for her. Her daughter is at the address and you can contact her there." And it was signed by F. Smith. They contacted Angela a couple weeks later. That's whenever the will company contacted Angela, and they were like, "Hey, this is weird and we're questioning this." So Angela immediately knew that it was forged after seeing it and everything, so she went straight to the police. Now, first things first, they wanted to find the people who signed their name as witnesses on the will, because when you have a will, you have just like people that sign their names on it as like saying that they were witnesses. They were there whenever you like wrote it and like said that that's what you wanted to do. For the witnesses, he had just used some random people who were in the waiting room, because people trusted this guy, so he would just walk up to patients and they didn't know what they were signing, but because it was Dr. Shipman, they trusted him, so they would sign it. And he got 2 random patients to sign that they were witnesses to this will. And then the police exhumed Kathleen's body because they wanted to examine it, you know, to see if someone had killed her. They just needed to take it to a coroner to inspect the body to see if anything wrong happened. When they examined her, she had a lethal amount of diamorphine in her body, which was the same thing used to help the cancer patients. Like I told you before, to help cancer patients, they would just give them pain medicine just to help as much as they could. So she had a huge amount of diamorphine in her system, and she didn't have cancer or anything. Diamorphine is another way of saying heroin. Back then, heroin was actually used a lot. It's not really anymore. I mean, for medical purposes. This was a weird one because this was the first time that Dr. Shipman had tried to get any money or anything from a patient. So a lot of people think that why he all of a sudden was trying to get money from his patients was because he was retiring or he somehow needed money for something. So people aren't really sure why all of a sudden he tried to get money from his patients, because before he was just killing them and not really like gaining anything from it. Shipman told the police when they asked him about it, when they confronted him, he told them that she was addicted to codeine, which as it's breaking down in the body, it turns to morphine. And he showed them her medical files trying to prove it, but he had forged them, and he didn't know that it was recording the dates that he was changing the information. So that's how the police caught him, because whenever he would go back and change stuff after the patient had died, it would change the date. And then so the police started looking at other patients, and they investigated 15 patients and verified that Shipman had killed them basically. The police eventually decided to stop looking at his patients because there were so many. They were all already buried, and the police just eventually decided that they had enough to arrest him. They had enough evidence against him to arrest him and have him serve a life in jail at least. So they decided to stop bothering the families of the victims, because I mean, these families are sitting there and they're all upset over their family member's death, obviously, and they're all grieving, and then the police are showing up saying that it's possible that their family member was murdered. So the police decided to stop doing that to people because, I mean, that's just awful. It's an awful situation. In 1986 alone, he issued 16 death certificates, and 8 of those were highly suspicious. They were patients that were in car accidents, or they had chest pains, or they died of old age, and he had been present for most of the deaths. And whenever they saw where Harold Shipman had been present for most of the deaths, and he had a lot of deaths, they asked another GP who had been one for 19 years, and they were asking him like what he thought about all of that, and he had only been present for 1 death out of all of his 19 years of taking care of patients. So if that's not super suspicious, then I don't know what is. So September 7th of 1998, that's when Shipman was called into the police station, and whenever he arrived, he was like super rude to everyone. His coworkers described him as being like super egotistical and acting like he's better and smarter than everyone, and he was literally acting like the police were dumb and stuff, which, I mean, I'm upset because I feel like they had looked into it more before. They would have gotten him before he had a chance to kill his last few victims, but since they didn't look at it, got away with it for a little bit longer. But he was acting like really dismissive to them and really rude to them, and he just kept insisting that she was addicted to the codeine and it wasn't his fault at all. And at one point, the interviewing officer said to him, "I've given you the cause of death as fatal overdose of diamorphine, and I've asked you to comment about that." But Shipman said, "And I have commented. I've said that I had my suspicions that she was actually abusing a narcotic of some sort, or at least taking a narcotic of some sort, over a period of a year or so." Then the police officer accused him of murdering with morphine. So then Shipman said, "No, and don't tell me that people in highs don't have access to drugs. I think you should talk to your drug squad." He was being very rude to the officers, acting like the officers were dumb and stuff. The police went and investigated his house, and they found the same typewriter that the will and the letter to the will company had been written on. So that gave police enough evidence to book him. September 8th of 1998, the magistrate's court charged him with forging Kathleen Grundy's will and also for murdering her, which led the police to charging him with 15 murders, and then eventually they stopped because it was too much for everyone involved. Can you imagine having to stop an investigation because you're finding like too many victims? Like, that's crazy. They found that one patient had gone in for an earwax treatment, but then later her file had been changed to saying that she had severe chest pains, and they just like kept finding that sort of story with most of the patients that had died. And I told you about the taxi driver earlier who said that he drove elderly people to get checked out by Dr. Shipman, but then they would all end up dying eventually. It's really sad because this doctor is taking people who, yeah, they're older, but they seem perfectly healthy for their age, but he's killing them anyway, and it's really horrible because you're supposed to be able to trust your doctor, and these people couldn't trust their doctor. The police ordered 12 of the bodies to be exhumed of his patients because they had been finding this sort of case over and over, and the coroner basically told him that is like ordering 12 bodies at once to be exhumed. That's just a thing that doesn't happen. And then that's whenever the police decided to just kind of back off. They were like, you know what, we have enough to book him for the rest of his life. Let's just leave it at that, you know, let's not bother these families any more than we already had to. Of course, like I told you before, Primrose was very faithful to Dr. Shipman, and she always believed that he was innocent, or she said that he was innocent, and he never showed any guilt or anything. January 31st of the year 2000, he was found guilty and sentenced to prison. Shipman is the only doctor in the history of British medicine found guilty for murdering his patients. I mean, there had been other doctors who had gotten in trouble for doing stuff to their patients, but they had all got acquitted. So he was literally the only doctor in Britain to be found guilty for murdering his patients. Finally, January 13th of 2004, on the eve of his 58th birthday, at 6:20 a.m., Dr. Shipman hung himself, and he was found in his cell and pronounced dead at 8:10 a.m. And this happened at Wakefield Prison. He had used his bed sheets and hung himself from the bars on his window. Now, people were really upset that he had gotten off so easily. They felt cheated because so many people in the community trusted him with their lives and with their family members' lives. A lot of people were really angry that he had killed himself because everyone felt like he got off super easy. And there was a man named David Blunkett, who was a home secretary. He said, you wake up and you receive a call telling you Shipman has topped himself, and you think, is it too early to open a bottle? And then you discover that everybody's very upset that he's done it. People just thought that he was a cold coward, and he never confirmed anything. He never gave a confession of any sort. There was absolutely no motivation, so they never got any conclusion. None of the families ever got any like real closure. There were 215 confirmed deaths by the hand of Dr. Shipman. A lot of people believe that there were up to 300. So all of this resulted in the Shipman effect. And this changed the way that the doctors in the UK prescribed medicine. And doctors actually got scared because none of them wanted to get blamed if one of their patients had died. And they actually started under-prescribing medicine. What Shipman did just caused like a whole domino effect of things. The death certificate process completely changed. The single GP practices were non-existent, so one general practitioner was not allowed to have like his own practice anymore, because it was just like all of the doctors just kind of had to look after each other and make sure that the other doctors were following all of the rules, because I mean everyone trusted this guy. And now all of these doctors and people that he worked with are like, we can't trust anyone because we all trusted him. And so it really affected the workplace, and it still is affecting a doctor's workplace. And so yeah, I just thought that this case was crazy because how many deaths he got away with, and like what a huge effect it had on the medical places in Britain. Sure, some of it's affected parts of the US too. Like this guy just really ruined going to the doctor for a lot of people. So if you want to add anything to this case down below that I might have left out, feel free to. If you are from Britain or you were in that area when he was still practicing, let me know if you know anyone that actually went to see him. And okay, so remember that I will not be uploading for like the first part of October, but that doesn't mean that I will be gone. It just means that I'm working on videos for my 13 days of Shelloween. And don't forget to enter my giveaway. I will be posting that October 1st on my Instagram, all of the details. And yeah, give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, because I like it when you like it. And also hit the button down below, subscribe, become a part of my tribe. You can definitely become a part of this little family who like to discuss serial killers while looking really pretty, I guess. All of my social medias are Shellie G MUA, and that is on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So if you want to follow me on any of those, It is just Shellie G MUA. If you want to follow me on Instagram to look at makeup without having to hear me talk, I completely understand. This is my last video until my 13 days of Shellyween begins. So I hope that you guys have a great fall, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. I'm so excited. I've got some really good videos coming your way. I think that's all that I have to say. I hope I'm not leaving anything out, but God bless. Love you. Bye.